Right, and as we continue to walk down memory lane and remember the second president of the Republic of Kenya, Daniel Moi, who died this morning at 5:20 a.m. at the Nairobi hospital in ICU. He had been ailing for a while. We are now joined by Senator Isaac Mwaura, who, Senator, maybe just to give you an opportunity also to send your condolences and possibly just what you remember of Moi.
Yeah, I think I want to pass my condolences to the late President Daniel Moi. And I remember him because of Maziwa ya Watoto wa Nyayo, which was a riddle prelude that we enjoyed when we were young. Of course, when I was small, my little mind used to think that Moi is second to God because of the way I could see his images everywhere high up on the wall. And also because, you know, everything was like Mkurima number one, Professor number one, everything number one. And then we used to say, Tikisa, Tikisa, you know, Kano, Moto, you know, those kind of things. And then, of course, the songs that we used to be taught during Madaraka Day, Jamhuri Day, Moi Day, they were about praising him. So he's really fundamentally changed the course of history of Kenya. I think a lot of things that we continue to see the ramifications were born out of his regime. He was somebody who dreamt of industrializing this country. You remember the numerical machining complex, the Nyayo car, the Nyayo bus, some of which had been assembled here. But of course, we remember him for both good and bad. I don't think I want to go for the bad. Many would have also seen him as a dictator, somebody who never agreed to hear different opinions. And of course, the clamor for multipartyism and the change of Section 2A. Kenyans, I think newspapers will be replete with his legacy. And he's lived for long, 95 or 96 years. I mean, 18 years after he left office in 2002. And I still remember how that morning when we woke up to the swearing in of Moi Kibaki, how the country was extremely excited, you know. So really, Moi has left a lasting impression. I don't think there is any politician in whose monuments and schools and roads and other public amenities have been named after, more than him.
More than Moi. Kioko, and as we walk down memory lane, the question here remains also that we need to ask ourselves, we that are the living, are we following in what, you know, our forefathers possibly envisaged as a country? 18 years after Moi, surrendered the instruments of power, which we have already mentioned was peacefully done, albeit there may have been pressure, but at least he was, reasonable enough to actually do that because he could have refused. But do you feel like as a country we're walking towards the direction that we ought to and we are where we ought to be?
I think there are certain positive gains that we've made and positive strides that we've made. When you look at President Moi's era and reign, and I keep repeating that word reign, there were many gaps, democracy-wise, the corruption was high, there were many deficiencies. And of course there were certain positiveness that you need to think hard to find them. The adoption of a new constitution in 2010, the election, the peaceful transfer of power in 2002, cemented the argument that power in this country will be transferred peacefully when somebody loses an election or when one's term ends. I think those are certain gains, fundamental gains, that must be respected. The freedom of speech, the depoliticization of the military. And I think that is something that we must talk about as a country. While our neighboring countries, the militaries have been at the forefront. You've seen what has happened in Uganda. You see what is in Rwanda and Burundi, and also South Sudan. The centrality of the military in the politics of those nations. In Kenya, the military today has stuck in the barracks. And part of it is the culture that Moi created, the culture that Jomo Kenyatta created, the culture that Honorable Kibaki pursued. We don't see the military at the forefront. Of course, there are certain losses that are happening. There are certain reversals that are happening. With the passing of the new constitution, we anticipated that the judiciary will be free from executive overbearing. We are seeing that happening now, reversals of certain gains. The centrality again of NIS in decision-making in our country. Now, when you look at that in totality, while somebody might say it's the BBI versus what and what, but again, when you bring these organizations to the center of our politics, then the neutral arbitrariness of these organs suffer. When you push the judiciary in a certain way, Yeah, if you put judiciary in a certain way, you deny them certain funds. Basically, you're taking us back to in the 80s when the tenure of judges was never secured. We must be careful not to slide back. We must be careful not to personalize our rule. We must be very careful to respect the current constitution as is. And even if there are changes to come, certain tenets, for example, the term limit of the president, must really not be tampered with. If Tanzania has managed to live that long, we've seen President Mwinyi, Mkapa, Kikwete, and they've gone without wanting backdoor entrance into executive privileges. We as a country must safeguard those gains.
Absolutely. And Honorable Wahome, you'll agree with me that there's definitely gains that we have made. Do you feel, are you proud to be a legislator in this day and age today, given that there are those who feel that we might be sliding back to where we came from?
Actually, I'm one of those people who have said, and I said it in the barrio of Rubia, that if we are not careful, and I was kind of addressing myself to His Excellency the President, because that was a right place, and the barrio had a lot of issues to deal with, the fight and clamor for democracy, and, you know, the place of Rubia, the role he played with Matiba. I felt that because we as a country, unless we want to be dishonest to ourselves, must say, like Macau has said here, Kyoko, sorry, that there are those things that are coming to play, which appear that we could slide back to bad habits of the regime, of the past, of the regime, the Kanu, let me just say the Kanu regime. And you know, where we are as a country, we must be proud of it. And it is not something that we were given. The country fought. People, Kenyans lost lives, their property suffered, made sacrifices. If you bring all those people who actually were detained, the Nyayo chambers, all those things, you arrests, you know, detentions without trial, you will see, and there was a lot of support from the civil society, meaning the country, the people supported the movement, the transition from the regime, the intolerant regime, the Kanu regime, to a multi-party democracy where you can speak wide freedoms, you know, of movement, political affiliation, speaking your mind. And therefore, this was put together by Kenyans in our 2010 constitution. That document, if we could just even implement half of our 2010 constitution, some of the complaints that are coming up wouldn't be there. You know, look at the Bill of Rights itself. Look at the values, the principles, you know, transparency, inclusivity, you know, or shared prosperity, economic freedoms, you know, ensuring that even access to health, you know, human rights records, to, you know, we don't have good records, human rights records. But if we were now to start fixing, because, you know, we can't live in the past. We must, as a country, then defend the institutions that have been established by the current constitution. And if the current government were just, you know, and when I speak that, I'm not removing myself from the government, because as a legislator, I'm proud, because Parliament is one arm of the government. Sometimes, you know, when we speak about the government, we seem to narrow it, like a third party, and we seem to narrow it down to the executive alone. You know, you have the commissions, which are the fourth arm of government, but we have the legislature, we have the independent judiciary, and of course we have the executive. If all these people did their work as now prescribed by the Constitution, without interference, interdependent, together, that we guard each other's, guard your space, you know, work as prescribed.
We'll be making progress. And let me come to
make progress.
Yeah, Senator.
Yeah, and the judiciary right now, even in Parliament, are not sitting at the place where the Constitution actually placed them. There are gains. There are gains that we could be losing, like we would want an independent judiciary. You know, and that independence starts with the past.
With the past.
Yeah.
Right. Let me bring in Senator, and there are many who might criticize the former regimes and what has happened before, but it is also true that we, if not careful, could lose some gains that we have very painfully fought for so far. Do you feel that we could be sliding back as a country given where we are today?
You know, I grew up under Moi regime, and I remember the Nyayo torture chambers and how people were really, I mean, lives were destroyed. I remember in 2002, there were documentaries that were done on people who had been taken to those, chambers. And for the first time, you could see how it affected families and all of that. I think the role of us is to keep eternal vigilance. We have a culture of human rights, and that is very difficult to take away from. Gains are lost slowly, Sometimes you don't see it coming, and we need to be eternally vigilant on that. The constitutional rule of law seems to be, I think the World Justice Project last year ranked us very low on the rule of law. And majority of our problems are actually because of the lack of rule of law. If then there's no rule of law, it's the rule of the jungle. And that is not something that...
And these are things that we're trying to fix as a country. Do you feel that where we are politically speaking, I mean, one of the things we're going to discuss if this had not come up was even basically building bridges, which is really meant to take us from where we were to where we're meant to be. Is that the direction that we should be taking?
Yeah, BBI is a conversation. It's a national conversation that needs to encompass everybody, all the shades of a political opinion.
Which it isn't doing so far.
I think people are being hypocritical. They're also playing political games. And I think that is not sincere. From both ends of whatever divide that is either real or imaginary. We have a document that is really a proper diagnosis of what is ailing our country. Very good document. But it falls short of giving solutions. So in my thinking, I think BBI 2 is supposed to ensure that. So what we are going to see is an encapsulation of the proposals into a referendum bill that then would speak to these ills. But you will not resolve everything through the law because you cannot legislate character. I'm beginning to actually think, Mike, Kenyans are very good people, but also there are many in leadership who are extremely dishonest, conmen, tricksters. And politics for me has become not a matter of truths and lies, but half-truths and half-lies. And that is what makes this country not move forward. Because sometimes people speak from both ends of their mouth. And you can't really tell whether they mean well for the country or it is, that juxtaposition of making change but also attaining political ambition. See? Your cameraman was showing us how Moi was able to outwit his competitors to become, the commander-in-chief. And you can hear even Moi prefer Dr. Kikonyo Kiano and all of that. So because of those games, political games of who attains political power and who gives a credit for transformation of the country, a lot is really lost. And I think good leaders fall by the wayside because of those shenanigans. That's the challenge of our leadership. Because sometimes it becomes very clouded. And then when you put some ingredients around the tribe, and you must also conform to certain political formations, then a lot really is lost. But I think good leaders must rise above that, must permeate that, because they say that by the end of the day, you are not going to be judged because of how strong you are, how intelligent you are, how rich you are, but how adaptable you are in terms of political landscape, and even just generally in life. So that is what we are looking for, that magic bullet. But I think also when you talk about human rights, it's not just about gross violation of human rights.